welcome to the BeamG podcast. Storytelling and writing. If you're an author or a screenwriter, you want to write good stories. So you craft your stories, forming the raw material of your ideas into a narrative. As an author, a vital task is the creation of the architecture of your story. Only when the narrative structure is sound will the story stand solidly, and only then will your audience want to live in your story world. Designing a plot that grips the audience, sending them on an emotional journey, and developing engaging fictional characters with depth and charisma is a difficult and time-consuming and hugely complex creative process. So in this podcast, we want to help you get to grips with your material and form it into a story. It helps you, hopefully, to create a beautiful and accessible outline of your narrative structure, guiding you through the process without ever being prescriptive. Authors are storytellers as well as writers. As an author, you need to compose a strong story in order to write a novel or a screenplay that wins over the audience to love your work. And how do you achieve that? If you're a fiction author, established or aspiring, or for stage or page or screen, you probably spend a great deal of time thinking about your characters and working out the details of your plot. After all, authors must master two equally important creative processes. One is the writing, finding the right words to formulate what you want to express, whatever you call it, like style or voice. It has to do with language. And the other is storytelling, constructing coherent narratives that have an emotional effect on the readers or your audience. So whatever you call it, outlining or plotting or story development, dramaturgy, it has to do with structure. So apart from language, stories have plots and characters. Creating plots and characters is a craft. And this podcast is about that craft, the craft of structuring narratives and developing characters. So it's not really about writing. Without a strong plot, driven by fascinating characters, even the best writing can't really save the story. So motivated characters lead to compelling plot structure. A strong plot creates the emotional engagement in the audience. And a satisfied audience spreads the word, creating a wider audience. That's why story development is such an important process. Story development. So this podcast will hopefully offer a comprehensive evaluation of all the aspects of narrative structure, be it in fiction or memoirs or even narrative documentary. We're talking about outlining compelling plots and creating memorable characters. The podcast wants to focus on dramaturgy and composition, and we conceive it to help you get to grips with everything from subplots to character transformation. We'll also cover communicating your story, how to pitch it to potentially interested parties. So we'll explain concepts like the log line and the step outline. Outlining, that's what we'll talk about a lot. So what is it? Well, there's a craft to storytelling. Much of that craft has to do with the structure of the story, the composition of its narrative. As an architect designs the plans of a building before the first bricks are laid, or a composer writes the music before it can be played, many authors design the story composition first, before filling the first page with text. The process of planning how the story is structured is known as outlining. So there are significant benefits to outlining. For one thing, Going through this process usually entails fewer rewrites later. When the author knows the direction of the storyline or storylines, it's easier to keep all the threads under control while writing. Without this direction, there's a danger of losing the plot halfway through. And outlining does not only concern the plot, it includes determining the motivations of the characters. So developing characters. Well, stories have characters. All of them do. Authors devise characters just like they devise plots. Often the act of composing a story can't really be separated into structuring the plot on the one hand and developing characters on the other. I mean, why would any author want to? Characters arise out of plot ideas as much as plot ideas arise out of characters. So this podcast helps you, hopefully, to determine the narrative function of the characters in your story by honing or sharpening the essential dramatic function of the major characters in the narrative. An author is at the same time honing and sharpening the plot. So yes, we advocate conscious composition. We want to raise your awareness of dramaturgy. This podcast is there to show you how to create emotionally engaging stories.